using sound clips in your PowerPoint presentations really do bring some added excitement to the presentation. They can be fun, or they can be a little bit serious or informative, or whatever the subject is. But quite often today you will find that people do use sound clips. But do make sure you don't use them in every slide. That's important to remember as well. And then, to be clear with your PowerPoints, you can use a different background in the whole presentation only if you want to emphasize particularly one slide. So that means don't keep changing all the time the background. Try to be a bit consistent, but if you do have to stress one particular slide, then go ahead and make that background a little bit different. Now we come to fonts, and this is where the lettering, the actual size and the style of font that you are using can have quite a bearing on the audience. As you know yourself, some font sizes are powerful, some are not, some styles are powerful and some are not. But the idea really is for the hierarchy of the words that you're saying. That is, if there is a title and then there is a main point, sometimes you can use a different size of font to show that it's a title. For example, a title font may be 36 point. That makes it larger than the main point, which you would then put at, say, 28 point. Some fonts under that you might lessen to be 24, for example. But try not to use too many different sizes on one slide. Usually you would probably use only 2 different sizes. And a standard font, for example, like Arial, as we mentioned before, Arial, Helvetica as well, are very clear, very simple kinds of fonts that are easy to read and comfortable on the eye. These are generally good guidelines to follow in terms of the type of font. Let's have a look at fonts that maybe in this slide you can see are difficult to read and are not really comfortable. If you see the first line, if you can see the first line, by the way, it's a little bit small, isn't it? So if you use a small font, your audience won't be able to read what you have written at all. And what happens as a result of that? Well, you know just as I do. People switch off. They're not interested. And then they begin to complain. They begin to find fault with your presentation. Next up, using capitals. Here, as we can see, there are 3 lines in full capitals. But you should really only use capitals when it is necessary. As you can see, it is difficult to read and it looks like you're shouting. It looks too extreme. It's not comfortable to the eye at all, and it does take up a lot of space. So only use capitals when it is necessary. Next point is here for bad fonts. As you can see, don't use a complicated font. This particular font is too flowery, too complex, and it's not easy on the eye. The main idea behind your presentations is that it's comfortable on the eye and people enjoy reading it and they're able to read the font quickly. These guidelines can help you when you're putting together your PowerPoint. I have, in my experience, seen so many PowerPoints that scream out at the audience, and it depends on what the audience particularly likes. But generally, if you can follow some basic guidelines and work up from there, then you'll begin to have more practice at putting together quite a pleasant looking and powerful presentation. Next we come to spacing. Spacing the lines, spacing the points on your slide. Here, if you have a set of points, space them out on the slide rather than spacing them all into one corner, as you see here. Unless, of course, you might have some graphs, perhaps, that you're going to fill with this slide. But as a general rule, when you start to put things in corners and too many boxes, that makes it a bit difficult on the eye to follow the gist of the presentation. Good spacing is where, if you have a set of points, as you can see on this slide, you space them out, and separating those points gives them emphasis. If you separate them out on the slide rather than putting them all in one corner, as we have just seen, then that gives more emphasis. And it gives importance to that particular point. Many a time we include graphs and graphics also in the presentation, and this is a good thing. It sometimes breaks up the information that you're trying to share and makes it a little bit more interesting and clearer to see. So I would say use graphs rather than just charts or words when you can. You would find that during your presentation, during the slides, you have some graphs that are wordy, you have some slides that have words, some slides that have pictures, some that have graphs. You'll mix it up slightly to make it a little bit more interesting. So graphs are pleasing on the eye. And also remember that the data in graphs is sometimes easier to understand and retain than raw data, which means you've just got lists of information and data. Remember that when we were talking earlier, people enjoy looking at visuals. People retain a lot from what they actually see in a visual. So graphs can really help you have a very successful presentation. And it's also true that trends, if you're trying to explain trends in a certain product or in a certain subject, trends are easier to visualize in a graph form. And don't forget, always title your graphs. Make sure that even though you have the bars on the side, the horizontal and vertical indicators, always put a title at the top of your graph to highlight it more clearly. As we see from this example, this graph is very simple, but there's no real title. We don't really know what this is about. So it's not very clear at all. Here we see, in this example, another graph. And this one does have a title this time. It's the same graph that we saw earlier, but here it is presented in a much clearer way, with color, with a title, and very nicely we can easily see what the subject is. Items sold in the first quarter of 2009. The graph is about items sold in the first quarter of 2002, and therefore we are very clear as to what this graph is telling us. So take a look at your graphs. As we saw in the first example, this graph was just very plain and it wasn't very clear and uninteresting. And actually, we really are not inclined to read graphs that are uninteresting. But when you saw it, as I just showed you here, with color, with a title, and set out very nicely, then you're more inclined to look at this graph and to read it. This is another way of looking at the graph, the same information. Which do you prefer? Which design of the graph is far more effective in your mind? Here, we've got the information, as you can see, but the fonts are very small, nothing is very clear, and the colors are quite dull, don't you think? And also there is no title. So play around with graphs as you are preparing them. Quite easily, we can see that the second way of presenting the information in this graph is the most preferred. Let's look at some other features that you might use in your presentation. Choose pictures that highlight your point. That is also a very good way to make your presentation interesting. Here, we can see that you could circle something, you could highlight it with a red circle, but then again, you need to be able to make that much clearer than what we see here on this slide. Use a screen to capture it if it's appropriate. So you would bring that up and make it much larger. Choose pictures, or you could circle things to highlight other features. Let's look at spelling and grammar. You always have to proof your slides. Never really leave it up for somebody else to go through and check the spelling and grammar. Never assume that as you've done your presentation that, oh, it's okay, I was very thorough when I did it, it's no problem, I'll leave it, it'll be good. Never really assume that. You have to go through your slides again and again and proof them for spelling mistakes. As we can see here, spelling. Use the use of repeated words. Sometimes you find that the is repeated, or and. These are simple mistakes that we do make. And sometimes the grammar is not correct. You might have used the wrong tense. For example, grammatical errors you might have made here. So sometimes we find that these little errors and spelling mistakes crop up, and you're halfway through a presentation and you've got your slide up for your audience, and what do you see? You see a speller or a word repeated, or you see a grammatical error. So go through yourself and then have somebody else check your presentation. Quite often other people will see things that you don't. Remember, when creating your slides, and here's a quick summary of some of the things that we've gone through, try to remember the 6-6 rule, 6 lines per slide and 6 words, maybe up to 7 words per line. Remember to use bold, dark colours. Remember to use titles and bullets to accentuate points, and try to keep to one theme per slide. If you clutter a slide with too many themes, then you're going to confuse your audience. So let's look a little bit now at colour. We use colour a lot. Colour is good to use in a presentation. Otherwise it seems rather dull and tedious and uninteresting. So the idea is to stick to colours that contrast sharply with the background. If the background and the colour of your text is too similar, then you won't notice the text at all. So you do need to make your words stand out by using a contrasting colour that is a sharp contrasting colour. You do need to use colour to reinforce somehow the logic of your structure as well. Colour is very helpful, and as we have spoken about this, colour is very powerful in helping you to remember, or your audience to remember, the information. So use colour to emphasize a point. If you have a single point you want to emphasize in a slide and you want it to make it stand out, then you can use colour separately for that point. But don't do this for every single point. It's only that particular point that needs to be highlighted. Here are some examples, as we can see, of bad usage of colour. It's very difficult to actually read the first line. Quite often yellow is not really a good colour to put on any slide, unless, of course, you have a very dark background. There you see you have contrast, and contrast will help you be able to read the text. So don't use non-contrasting font colours. Here the yellow is very close to the white, and therefore it makes it difficult to read. What is bad about using colour? Using colour for decoration is distracting and annoying. So don't use it just to decorate. It's got to be there mainly to emphasize things. As I mentioned, using a different colour for each point is unnecessary. And here we have pink and here we have red. Using a different colour for secondary points is also unnecessary. The way to highlight those points, of course, is using bullet form or numbering, rather than using colours for each single different point. And then, lastly, you see the line at the bottom of this slide. trying to be creative with color can be bad. It can be very busy. It can be very unattractive, as you see here. Putting too many colors in a sentence is just ridiculous. Remember, the idea of your words is to catch the listener, to catch the audience, and have them remember the message that you're trying to convey. Not to come away with a headache because they've seen too many colors of the rainbow all in one slide. What is a good background? The best kind of background you can use is a simple background. A simple one that may have a bit of design on it, but it's not cluttered, it's not too busy. Also, good backgrounds are ones that contrast with the text or contrast with the images that you have on that slide. So this means that you do have to be very careful with your background, making sure that the message of your text and images is not lost in the actual background. There are some very nice backgrounds that you can use, but don't make the background the focal point of your presentation. It's just there to soften and to highlight the information that's on top of the background. And a good idea for consistency and to keep that theme in place during your presentation is to use the same background consistently throughout. Don't chop and change the backgrounds. Try to be consistent so the background will give a kind of flavor, a kind of theme to the talk. And people will become used to it. Their eyes will become used to the background. If suddenly you change that background, then, you get the audience sort of wondering if you forgot something or if you missed something out. So your background actually lends a kind of personality as well to your presentation. Here in this slide, as you can quite obviously see, this background is a bad choice. Why is it a bad choice? You tell me. I'm sure you understand very easily. It's a bad choice because it's difficult to read the text. And also, it's quite distracting. It's quite a powerful and strong background. It is not easy on the eye. It's quite bright on the eye. And also, it is a bit busy and it's not necessary. Always be consistent, as I mentioned previously, with the background that you use. More about the importance of color. We have talked about color in our lines and having a look at what colors work, what colors don't. And I just want to highlight that the biggest reason for the power of visuals is color. So color has to be therefore used in the right way, in a good sense. Comprehension and retention, understanding and remembering what is going on is improved by 45% over black and white. So that's a very startling figure. So that will make you think about putting color into your presentation because your audience is going to come away understanding and remembering 45% more over having used black and white in your presentation. And another thing about color is that color guides emotional responses. There are certain colors that are very pleasing and very attractive and very comforting. So colors can help you really get a response. That's why when you see a heart shape, for example, in a slide, usually that heart shape is red. Red is the color of passion. It represents love, etc. So what I'm saying is colors can help you get an emotional response. If we look at a red background here, using the color red, the red background is not very effective. If we look here, is a green background effective? So colors are very powerful. The purple writing on the green background, how do you think about that? Or is the red background much more effective? the red background jumps right out at you. And I think if you looked at a slide too long with a red background like this, you would end up with a headache. So the idea is with colour, remember, colour for your fonts, colour for your text, and colour for your backgrounds. Be careful how you use them. They will get a very sort of startled response if they're not used well. So what colours are good? Colours that make the text legible, colours that give you contrast with graphics, because you need contrast as well, and colours that give you contrast on the background. You can also use a dark background sometimes that will give you that contrast. For example, here we see that there's a dark background when we want to highlight this particular signboard or this particular information. So use colours well. Play with them. The idea behind your colours is that you put them up on the screen, you stand right back at the end of the room in your preparation time and your rehearsal time, and you go through things and you get other people to help you look at the colours and see whether they are powerful or effective or not. So this is an important way to be able to help you validate whether you have used the right kind of colours or not. There's a bit more that I want to tell you about using visual aids. It's all very exciting to sit there and design a very powerful presentation through using lots of visual aids. But remember, the point of the visual part of your presentation is to try to connect your subject with the audience, trying to connect you with the audience. So visuals are very, very necessary to connect, not just to look pretty. They are there to connect you with your audience. And so it's a very good way of trying to convey your message. Visual aids point out tables and graphics. And the more complex the graphics, the more pointing out you need to actually do with those graphics. You need to make sure that the visual is pertinent, meaning it is appropriate, it is actually representing what you are saying, that it connects with the message that you're trying to give. And something you need to watch when you're using visual aids is that it's best not to leave up a complex visual when you have finished talking about it. Once you've finished talking about a complex graph, for example, that you have gone through and explained, then get moving on to the next slide. Don't leave it up way too long, because then people sort of start to think even more deeply about that graph and they start to discuss it, and maybe that will throw you off the next point of your subject that you're trying to make. Just leave it up long enough for you to give the explanation, then move on to the next slide. In using your presentation, in using your PowerPoint or your flip charts or whatever visual aids that you are using, there is a guideline to follow. We call it the 4 T's. If you've got your projector up and your screen is okay and you have your PowerPoint showing up, then turn to the PowerPoint, touch it with a pointer perhaps. You have a pointer, turn back and then talk. Try to develop this 4 T's technique. It's the same with a flip chart or a whiteboard that you might be using. Turn to it, touch it, meaning highlight or using a laser beam or whatever you wish, or your hand if you're using a flip chart, you can do that. Touch it, turn back to the audience, then talk. Never really stand in front of what you are showing. And never always talk at the flip chart or talk at the screen. Remember, you've got an audience there. You've got to pull yourself back. We say, turn yourself around again and look at the audience. Remember the 4 T's. Turn, touch, turn back and talk. I have, in my experience, seen lots of people who have looked at their PowerPoint realize that this is all the information and it's up there and they don't have to remember very much, and all they do is spend the whole time talking at the screen, talking at the visual. And the audience are wondering where that presenter is. The audience has no connection with that presenter. So this is a no-no. You do have to remember, turn, touch, turn back, and talk to your audience. In your preparation time, you should have really tried to memorize and learned the information that you want to speak about. So this is where rehearsal is very, very important. Another point about your visuals, allow the audience time to read. Don't rush on to the next slide. Really give them time to read it. You're explaining it, but you also do need to give them time to read it and look at the visuals and absorb the information as well. So the idea then is to make sure that the audience is in touch with what you are trying to say by having a little bit of time to absorb it. Sometimes we also need to, at the end of our presentation, or indeed at the beginning of the presentation, depending on how you're running with it, you would supplement the presentation with appropriate handouts. And these can take many different forms. It could be that you want to give an outline of the presentation or an outline of what you're going to speak about. It could be that you have some additional kinds of articles that you want to add that you're not showing up on your PowerPoint. PowerPoint doesn't have to show everything about what your presentation contains. But there may be additional articles that you'd like to hand around for people to read up later on in their private time. You might want to add your bibliography, information about yourself, and that's very useful. You could also give them a copy of the PowerPoint presentation, and you can make this in various formats. You can ensure that there are perhaps 3 or 6 slides to a page. 6 slides makes the reading a little bit difficult, but generally I like to put about 4 slides to a page. That's a comfortable number of slides to be able to read things. And so you might like to do that and hand those PowerPoint presentations out, bound and copied nicely to supplement your presentation. Now we come to the rehearsal part of presentations, and this is where you start to prepare to practice delivery of your presentation. As I said before, this is a crucial part of being a successful presenter. And you will find that the more time you devote to rehearsing, the more polished and more powerful your presentation and delivery of that presentation is going to be. I'd just like to open this with an explanation of what is an extemporaneous talk. An extemporaneous talk is one that is prepared in advance but delivered without notes or text. Now, as I mentioned to you earlier, some people have a gift. They can get up and stand in front of an audience and they can just off their chest just speak out and give a very powerful speech. This is a rare quality. Not everybody has this ability. Most people have to really study and memorize and rehearse and practice and write things down. That's how we are. But we can take all of those things that I just mentioned there and prepare in advance to give what we call an extemporaneous talk. That is one where you don't have to clutter the table in front of you with lots of notes. You can speak from the preparation that you have done. From all the advanced work you have done, you're going to draw on that and give your presentation. It might appear like it's impromptu, but it is not impromptu. there has been pre-talk planning and preparation. This is actually what you should be aiming for. If you actually enjoy speaking, you enjoy presenting to large audiences, and if this is something that you'd like to follow up with, become a very good speaker by doing lots of advanced work, lots of pre-talk planning, and then you appear to be very professional when you get up and you present. So an extemporaneous talk is also not a memorized speech, because the way you're talking is more like a conversation. So this is quite an art form, to be able to stand up and draw from your memory and all the advanced work you've done information, and at the same time to present it as though it's a kind of conversation where you're asking questions to the audience, you're having a joke with the audience, you're talking with them, and you're relaxing with them. This is an art form, and this is really very pleasing to the audience when they see a speaker or a presenter present this way. So, how do you prepare to deliver your presentation? First of all, you rehearse. You rehearse using a skeleton outline, a rough outline of the main points of your presentation. You have previously, of course, gone through the information and you have tried to memorize it, or you know it anyway. Perhaps it's part of your job, so it's something that you know and you don't need to study up on. So you rehearse using a skeleton outline, and to help you really do well, you can record your presentation. This is a very good way of being able to see the mistakes that you make and see how you look and how you walk, etc., up there on the screen. Quite often when we do presentation skills programs with various people, we do have a recording segment in our program. And this is where people actually have to prepare a whole presentation, just as we have gone through in this session. And then they have to present it in every respect to an audience. And quite often people are shocked by the way they look and how they sound. And it's an excellent way to be able to pick up on your weak areas and see how you've got to tone down perhaps other particular areas of your vocal presentation or your body language. So, record your presentation, have a friend record it, or if you're in your office, your colleague, your assistant can record it, and then play it back and go through it and do what we call a post-mortem. Pull it apart. Take every piece of it and pull it apart, and then see how you need to improve it. And the other thing you need to do when you're rehearsing, apart from the outline of your content, apart from recording it and playing it back, is to learn how to manage the visual aids, all the equipment that you are working with, the table where you're putting your computer on, and the notes, where do you need to put them. Try to manage all of the equipment and the visual aids that you are going to be using in your presentation. And also the visuals in your presentation. Be very knowledgeable about them. Make sure they are very, very accurate. Another point to rehearsing, of course, is to practice eye contact. And this is where your recording of your presentation in the rehearsal will help you. You'll be able to see the way that you're gazing at the audience, and if you are indeed giving appropriate eye contact. You'll also be able to see whether you're very nervous as well. So rehearse, and point number 2, as an accentuated point, practice your eye contact. If you have found that that's a difficult part of your behavior, then really practice up on it. And when you are rehearsing, have some people sit in as the audience, if that's at all possible. This can often help you, depending on the seriousness, or if it's a major presentation that is a very significant one. So get some people in there. Have them sit and be your pretend audience and practice your eye contact with them. And remember, when you're using your visuals, remember the 4 T's. Turn, touch, turn back, and talk. So practice, practice, practice. If it requires you to work as a group and prepare and present as a group, then do that. Rehearse as a group. And don't accept if one person can't come along if they're busy doing something else. It's important that you rehearse together because everybody is a part of that presentation. So check your timing, watch your time. The idea, I think, that's very good is to have a very large clock at the wall facing you so you can quite easily just look up and see the time. And depending on who you are, you can either have digital clock or a normal face clock, which is easy to read and to follow the minutes. This, I think, is very important, and I use it in every presentation that I do, even in all the training that I conduct. I make sure I have a great big clock on the wall facing me and that I can easily see the numbers so I can calculate times. And if you're rehearsing as a group as well, provide feedback to each other. Tell each other what you think was a good thing, a bad thing, and what needs to be improved on, etc. Feedback is important. This is why when you are presenting by yourself as well, as an individual presentation, have somebody as an audience member who can give you some feedback. Rehearse sometimes without PowerPoint. Rehearse with it and without it. So that means you have to draw on your knowledge. This will check you out to test you to see whether you have actually got all the details up here as well. Of course, you can have your prompt notes, but rehearsing without PowerPoint is a very excellent way of knowing whether you're going to fluff your lines, knowing whether you've got enough information to actually talk with. And also rehearse with PowerPoint, as I said. Do both kinds of rehearsals. It really will perhaps wake you up when you do the rehearsal without the PowerPoint. This will help you become very, very perfect in what you're going to do with this presentation, believe you me. So here are the points on practicing and rehearsing. Use your time, check your time, get feedback, rehearse with a friend and get feedback from a friend, and rehearse with and without your PowerPoint. Remember, the art of a great presenter is that they should actually be able to get up there in front of a group of people and just naturally speak about the subject without assistance from anything. That really is the essence of great speaking and presenting. But we have lost a bit of that as we've come along the way in these years using internet and computers. We do tend to rely a lot on the PowerPoint, but do remember that the PowerPoint is not always a star of the show. I said that earlier in this session. PowerPoint is there to assist you. You are the star of the show. Also, use your voice effectively. We've gone through voice in our vocal factors, our vocal session of presentation. So use it very effectively. Remember all those points that we talked about. And when you do record, remember to, when you play back, listen to your voice. Your voice will really help you understand where you should be improving yourself. Cultivate the movement that you have, cultivate your gestures and your whole body. All of these things are very important when you're recording and rehearsing. Get to know what doesn't look good, and recording yourself is a fantastic way of getting to see your gestures and the way you move yourself. Check your mannerisms. Check your habits, what you do with your hands, if you play with your hair, if you click your pen, etc. All of these mannerisms, check them out and make sure that you have a thorough knowledge of what is not looking good and what does look good. In delivering, finally, just to emphasize to you, Try to contain your stage fright. Try to control your nerves and take those breathing, slow breaths in and out. Try to contain your stage fright. We talked about how to overcome fear before, so I hope you've tried to go through those points, and when you get up there, you are able to manage your stage fright. Remember, attention getters, the things that we highlighted about, first of all, getting the attention of your audience right from the moment you stand up in front of them. Remember the name of your presentation and the purpose of your presentation. And highlight the roadmap. Highlight what you are going to talk about throughout your presentation. Check your movement always as you're on the stage, as you're in front of your group, and of course your voice. These points I just want to emphasize. We've gone through them in detail before, but I just do want to emphasize these parts of delivering. Furthermore, when you are delivering, remember how you react to the audience. The way you react is very, very important, and it's going to mean the success or failure of your presentation. Giving your delivery, you really do need to strengthen your presence. You need to think about your confidence and strengthen it if it's a little bit weak. You need to think about your enthusiasm and improve upon that if you find that you tend not to speak enthusiastically. You need to think of how sincere people feel you are, whether you have sincerity in your voice. And you also need to think about your friendliness. These things will strengthen your presence. I don't mean that you have to be overboard or go extreme with these things. But when we first started this presentation program, we talked about what makes a skillful presenter. And these 4 things certainly came into part of that explanation. So I'm highlighting these points again. People like to be where they are. They like to enjoy a presentation or enjoy a meeting. So if you can strengthen these 4 points and become very effective in them, then this is going to make your presentation far more powerful and successful. And people are going to come back to your presentation. So keys for success. Start positively. Handle that stage fright. Use your audio-visual aids effectively. Don't fumble, don't stumble, otherwise don't use them. Evaluate your audience feedback and end very positively. Your ending sometimes can mean whether people will buy your product or walk away and go to another competitor. So make sure that your ending is very positive and powerful. Once the presentation is over and you've finished talking about your subject, then you tend to breathe a sigh of relief. You feel, wow, I've got this far, I've finished, I feel good about that, and then suddenly you find you're coming to the question-answer part. Or indeed, sometimes during the presentation, you come up with people who ask you difficult questions, questions that maybe throw you off, questions that make you a bit annoyed, or questions that perhaps you can't answer. So therefore, it's important to get a few ideas about how to handle questions that come to you. We're going to look at the benefits and the challenges that come from having questions asked in a presentation, the types of questions and how to handle those questions to make you feel comfortable and to ensure that people go away feeling good about the questions that you answered or the answers that you gave. So in some ways we can say that there are benefits of questions. Questions, we really don't like them, but sometimes the questions can help us. And they do allow us to clarify some points if we haven't made them clear during the presentation. And you might be very thankful of that somebody asked something and you can add a little bit more to it to make the point clearer. And questions also allow you to provide more information that way as well. In some ways, questions, if you handle them well, can demonstrate your expertise and your knowledge, and they give you much more credibility in the eyes of the audience. Questions also can involve your audience, and that means the atmosphere becomes a little bit more upbeat. People start to get involved and enjoy and participate a little bit more. So it has a very positive effect. Questions also can create a forum for other points of view. From one question, you may lead into something else that's also related, and then people can discuss other points of view. So it has a healthy aspect to the subject of your presentation. Also, questions can help check for understanding of things. Perhaps other people, when a question is asked, gain much more understanding of a point. So this is a great benefit as well to the presentation. So don't be afraid of questions. I would say that you need to regard questions in a very positive sense as a benefit and as a challenge. There are varying kinds of questions, of course. Some questions are information seeking, wanting more information, and sometimes they are complex and difficult to answer. Sometimes questions can be what we call hostile or loaded, meaning that they've got lots of parts in them and that they are a bit dangerous because somebody's resisting what you are saying and having a conflicting point of view perhaps. Sometimes the audience gets a bit angry or annoyed at perhaps what you have said, and they will come out with a hostile or a loaded question. These sometimes will throw you off, and you may find it difficult to answer, but we'll have a look at those in a moment. Sometimes the questions also are closed-ended, meaning that you will have to answer just a yes or a no or one word. And that's quite okay. They're quite good questions because they're quick to handle and quick to move on. With closed-ended questions, you can even invite somebody else to answer the question if you want. You can face and attend to the questioner and then answer the question yourself, or you can invite the group to answer the question. You could also invite the group to ask perhaps the next question. So with questioning, there are certain techniques that you can develop that can create more involvement with the audience and bring great benefit. So here you are playing a little bit with the audience, getting them involved, making them enjoy the situation. This is, of course, if you are able to handle those questions and they're not hostile. Handle questions masterfully. This means that you do need to be aware of your body language when you are answering questions. So face the person who's asking the question, as we've just gone through, and attend to them. Reflect, if you like, the question to someone else if you think that that's a technique you might like to use and you feel comfortable using that, just to get some other people's points of view before you also give your answer. And sometimes this is a technique. If you're not sure of the answer and you want to get a little bit of information from the audience, then you can reflect the question to someone else, be thinking to yourself what you might like to say after you hear a few different points of view. Then pause and then respond to the person with your own answer. And then check back and say, how does that help you? Is that all right with you? You can say those sorts of things to the questioner. These are just a few little techniques to help you on your way. Sometimes handling questions is very, very difficult if they get hostile particularly, or if you have not prepared in advance. And then you're in trouble. And you don't want to look ridiculous, you want to look professional. So you do have to have some techniques up your sleeve that you can use to make the question time not seem awkward and make it go very, very well. You could say, for example, when you're reflecting back to the audience. You could reflect your question to someone else, or you could reflect by opening your response this way. You're wondering whether such and such, such and such, or you'd like to make sure that such and such and such and such exists, or you're hoping for blah, 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 or you'd be helped by knowing such and such, such and such. These short phrases can help you when you're reflecting back. You could say, the issue for you is such and such, such and such, or the problem you're concerned about is such and such, such and such. And from there on, you go more into trying to answer that question. So you can reflect back to the individual themselves, or you can direct your question to somebody else to try to get some information from others to get a more different point of view. But when you are doing this, watch out for your tone of voice when you're rephrasing a question. Sometimes you don't want people to feel like they're an idiot. You don't want them to feel bad. It could be they missed a point and they're asking a question and the answer is quite obvious, but you don't want to make your audience feel bad. So if you're going to use the words, for example, obviously, sometimes we might use that, be careful how you say that. You may make the audience member feel like they're stupid. If they have asked something you have already mentioned and you say, obviously, you haven't heard me say da-da-da. If you use this word obviously, that person will feel rather bad. If you tend to use the word as I said before, be careful because you might be also making that audience member feel a little bit uncomfortable, that they missed the point, that they weren't listening. So be careful how you use these phrases. One thing, when you are saying, that's a good question, when you say that, really say it in an encouraging way and a positive way, an enthusiastic way, which lets the audience feel like you are happy that they asked the question. And when you don't know the answer, then there are ways that we can say that. There are certain ways to respond when you don't know an answer. So you have some response options. Answer briefly and move on. With questions, this is important. Don't really prolong the discussion or make it a very lengthy answer. Answer briefly and move on. You could answer partially the question and come back to another part of it later after the presentation if things are too lengthy. You can, in your responses, refer the questioner to a source, refer them to a book or to the writings of a teacher or a famous writer, etc. You can refer them to a source. You could see them at the break. This is a very good technique. If you want to cut down on the question time, if it's taking too long, or it's too lengthy to answer, or it's a bit of a hostile question, you can see that person during the break and speak to them one-to-one, away from the audience. You can, as a response option, turn your question back to the questioner. Instead of answering, you could say, that's a very good question, so let me ask you first, how would you feel about that? What's your response? This is a technique. Don't use it too often. Use it when you feel it's appropriate. And sometimes if you're perhaps not quite sure yourself and you need to hear some more points of view, you can do this. You can turn it back to the questioner who asked that question, or as I said before, you can turn it to another member of the audience. Get them involved. If you don't know the answer, you can find the answer and get back to the questioner later on. This is something you can do. You could say to them, that's a good question. I would like to get some more information on it and get back to you if I may, so that I can be clear about what I want to let you know. Is that all right? So you can get back to them. And sometimes if you may not know the answer, depending on the rapport, depending on the atmosphere and the feeling you have with your audience, you could say, I don't know. To tell you the truth, I don't know the response to that, but I do have an idea that da-da-da-da-da-da. So, depending on how you want to react to that I don't know or how your audience is, be careful how you respond in that way. But it is always best to be truthful. People can tell when you don't know. So if you say or you try to answer a question and you don't know, they will know that you're not being truthful, that you're trying to find an answer and it's not working out. So be wary of that point. People are clever. People can tune in to the fact that you're trying to look for the right and correct answer, but you may not know it. Just be honest and find out the answer to that later on. So we can see the questions and answers are the beginning of a whole new interactive presentation at the end of your initial presentation. They actually can be very beneficial in that even though they may be tough, you may have 15 to 20 minutes perhaps of full question and answer time at the end, but even though they are tough for some speakers and presenters, they do have a great benefit to them in that they give you the opportunity to make points, to revalidate some of the information you've passed on, and to stress certain things that you want the audience to take away with them when they leave the room or leave the venue. Do you know that most presentations are won or lost here at the question and answer time? So you have to be on your toes. You have to know your stuff. You have to really know your product or know what you're talking about very, very well. So as a point to remember, question and answer time is a key time. It is crucial. So you do have to prepare in advance and try to anticipate questions that are going to come your way and work out the answers that you are going to give well in advance. This is included in your preparation time and rehearsal. So here we are. Some final guidelines to questions and answers. Anticipate them. Rehearse them. Try not to rank questions because you'll get confused. That question's more important, I'll do it first, that one second, this one. Don't do that. Answer them as they come along. Keep your answers brief. Don't prolong them, don't tell stories, depending on the situation, but the general rule is keep them quite brief. And you have to watch your time, by the way, as well. Be honest. People will understand when you are not honest. So be honest and truthful. And if you can, avoid negative words. Try to turn negatives into positives. Use words that are encouraging words. Don't repeat negative questions. You can repeat positive questions to emphasize and bring the audience into that question, but don't repeat negative ones as a general rule because you're compounding a negative. Just listen to it, then answer it. That way, hopefully, the audience will forget the question and not focus on it. Clarify the question if you need. Make sure you understand it before you answer it. And defer to experts. If you find that you perhaps have a group of people with you there at the presentation and they might be more technically oriented or have more expert information, then you can defer to your colleague to provide the answer to that question. Move your eyes off the questioner. Try to take your eyes off that particular questioner and give your gaze to the whole of the group. That way you are including everybody and people feel that they're involved in the question, that it's just not you and the questioner talking together. If negative, end your response focused on somebody else. There's one very important rule that you really do need to follow when you're in your question and answer time, or indeed when you're giving a presentation of any sort. And the rule is to never argue with a member of the audience. This is something that's going to create a whole lot of problems for you and destroy your credibility absolutely if you do this. So when you find that there are hostile customers or hostile audiences, please don't ever argue with them. You may want to, you may wish to, but don't do it in front of the audience or with that audience member. Try to keep a very neutral stance on these sorts of things. Instead, if you've got somebody and you feel that it might escalate into an argument, just look at them. Try to remain neutral and attentive, as I mentioned, and listen to the whole question. It could be that your heart is pounding or your pulse is racing and you're getting quite angry because it's a hostile question perhaps. However, you do need to pause. You do need to control yourself. You do need to control those emotional impulses of yours and pause before you respond. You would then address the questioner, then move your eyes to other people. So be very careful not to get involved in arguments. Be neutral. I suppose that's the best thing I can say to you, is to be neutral in this kind of situation. Depending, of course, on the nature of what you're talking about and the audience. But as a general rule, as a general guideline, don't start getting involved in arguments. If it works out that that person or that questioner is quite hostile and quite a vocal arguer, then that's a disruption you have to deal with when it happens. And usually you try to settle those situations down and move on to the next thing so that the audience benefits and that you're not focusing your whole time just on that particular person. There's a phrase that you can use, which is a very helpful phrase in answering questions. And we say, as easy as ABC. You can say this: I can't answer that question because, and you can say why you can't answer that. I can't answer that question because at this point in time we have only maintained studies on such and such, and we are in the process of reviewing the particular product that blah, 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 blah. So I can't answer that question because of something else. Then you can add, but I can tell you da, 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 da. So you are saying that you can't answer the question, and people know if you can't answer something because of a certain reason. Then you are saying, but I can tell you, and then you give information. So your response here has a bit of a negative. It has the honesty of not knowing, but then you turn that around into something very positive by saying, but I can tell you this. I can give you this information, which is da da da. So the A, B, C phrase here is a very important one that you can use in your question and answer time when you are answering questions that you can't really answer, but you can give certain information to help your response. There are some quotes that I'd like to finally end up with here as we finish up our segment on presentation skills. Mark Twain said, "It's better to keep your mouth shut and appear ignorant than open it and remove all doubt." So here he means it's best to only speak when you know what you're talking about. So that's something to remember as a presenter. You need to know your stuff. In other words, you need to be knowledgeable about your subject. And also by Dorothy Sarnoff, make sure you have finished speaking before your audience has finished listening. So these two quotes are quotes you can put in your toolkit as you progress in developing your presentation skills. There are many quotes that are quite motivational that you can seek out and remember that will help you to come back to the focus of what good presenting is all about. Now we have come to the end of our session on effective presentation skills. And I'd like to leave you with a quote by Mark Twain. He wrote that it is better to keep your mouth shut and appear ignorant rather than open it and remove all doubt. What this means is, if you don't know what you're talking about, then please don't begin to speak. Otherwise, you are going to really look ridiculous. So, this means for you as a presenter, know your subject. Don't get up there and begin to present or speak about something unless you know everything about what you're saying, because otherwise you are going to look ridiculous and you're not going to be effective at all. You will lose your credibility and people will know exactly that you don't know what you're talking about. So don't say anything if you don't know your subject, in other words. I do hope that you have enjoyed this session on presentation skills. We have gone through a lot. We have gone through the beginning right through to the end of talking about the appropriate body language, the appropriate vocal skills, how you begin, how you fill the middle, how you close a presentation, all sorts of things that will help you become much more powerful in presenting. We've looked at ways of trying to contain your nerves and trying to be confident. We've looked at also how to use PowerPoints, how to use visual aids very effectively. I do hope that you have understood a lot of the things we've gone through and that you can take away some of these points as being very valuable to helping you prepare great presentations. I wish you a lot of luck when you do have to present or speak in front of a group. It is no easy task, but do remember this. Each and every person can do better at these skills. You can learn to improve yourself, but it does take the 3 P's. Preparation, practice, 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 and being prepared. So please do remember those things when you are next getting ready to present. And I wish you success in all of your presentations. Thank you very much.